Okay, let's dive right in. Today we are unpacking a really compelling narrative from the Old Testament. It's the story of the Anakim and their, their pretty dramatic encounter with the Israelites.
Yeah.
Our source material for this deep dive is a transcript we've got from the YouTube channel Glory of the Scriptures. And it lays out this biblical account of these intriguing figures often described as giants. So our mission today is to sort of work through this source, figure out who exactly the Anakim were, understand the massive challenge they represented, especially as the Israelites were right there on the brink of entering the Promised Land. And we want to pull out the key lessons woven into this whole interaction.
Right. And to get started, let's just,
Place ourselves in that moment. Think about it. The Israelites, after all those years wandering, they're finally standing on the edge of Canaan. This is the land promised to them, but, well, it's occupied.
Right.
And right there, presenting an immediate and, frankly, pretty terrifying obstacle, are the Anakim. Okay, so these Anakim, who were they according to the source?
Well, the source mentions them several times and, consistently describes them as a race of giants.
Giants.
Yeah. And their lineage, it says, traces back to a figure named Ansh. But what's really highlighted is Arba, Anshi's father. He seems to have been a particularly important leader among them.
Arba.
Right. The source points to Joshua 15, verse 13. It mentions Hebron, which was apparently formerly called Kiriath Arba.
Named after him.
Exactly. Named after Arba, who the verse calls the greatest man among the Anakites. So that kind of grounds their presence, their significance right there in that region. And the key takeaway really is that they were formidable, just absolutely terrifying to the Israelites. Hebron, this place, Kiriath Arba, it was one of their strongholds, right there in Judah, central part of Canaan.
Okay, that definitely sets the stage. Now let's talk about that pivotal moment mentioned in the source. When Moses sent the 12 spies into the Promised Land. That's in Numbers 13.
The scouting mission.
Right. And 10 of those 12 spies came back.
Yeah.
And their report was just, drenched in fear. They described the inhabitants and specifically mentioned the Anakim. Listen to this quote the source gives from Numbers 13.33. We saw the Nephilim, they're the descendants of Ansh, come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them.
Wow.
Yeah. And they also reported the cities were large with walls up to the sky.
Grasshoppers in our own eyes.
Can you imagine hearing that after years in the wilderness?
Yeah, I mean...
And notice how the source here makes that link. The Anakim, descendants of Ansh, connected directly to the Nephilim.
Yes, that's right there in the report itself as the source presents it. That connection is explicit. And that line about grasshoppers, it's just so powerful, isn't it?
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates the sheer scale of intimidation. It wasn't just their presence. It was how seeing them utterly crush the Israelites' self-perception. And critically, their faith in God's promise, that fear, that report, it just spread like wildfire through the camp, made them feel tiny, insignificant.
And that leads right into the consequences, doesn't it?
Exactly. The consequences of that fear and, disbelief. The source really highlights God's strong reaction to this lack of faith.
What was the judgment?
It was pretty severe. They were sentenced to 40 years of wandering in the desert.
40 years.
Yeah, 1 year for each day the spies were in the land. The source quotes God's declaration from Numbers 14, verses 29-30. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall, every one of you, 20 years old or more, who is counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun.
Wow. So only Caleb and Joshua from that generation would make it in.
That's right. So their failure to enter the land then is presented in the source as a direct result of their inability to trust God, to trust that he could actually help them overcome these obstacles, even obstacles as intimidating as, the Anakim and these huge walled cities.
It really underscores the cost of that disbelief.
Absolutely.
Like the cost of that initial fear. Okay, so let's fast forward those 40 years.
Yeah.
That generation, the one filled with fear, they've passed away. Except, of course, Caleb and Joshua.
Right.
Moses is gone, and now Joshua is leading the next generation of Israelites into Canaan.
A new chapter.
But despite that long delay, the source makes it clear. The Anakim, they were still very much present. It specifically names Hebron, Debir, and Anab as their locations, still in the hill country of Judah and Israel. They hadn't just disappeared.
No, exactly. They were still there. So Joshua and this new generation, they began the campaign to conquer the land. And the Anakim, those very giants who had caused so much fear before, they were actually among the last groups faced and defeated in this campaign.
Really? The last ones?
Among the less, yeah.
Yeah.
The source brings in Joshua 11, verses 21-22 to describe this conquest. It says, "At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Dare, and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them, and their towns, no Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive."
So a complete turnaround from the spies' report.
A total turnaround.
Right.
This passage from the source is crucial. It shows that despite their, legendary size and the crippling fear they initially inspired, the Anakim could be overcome.
Right.
Under Joshua's leadership, with a generation whose faith was, different, they were systematically defeated, wiped out from the heartland, leaving only those scattered remnants in those Philistine cities mentioned, Gaza, Gath, Ashdod. Such a sharp contrast to that first fearful encounter.
It really is. And this is where the story of Caleb just becomes so compelling, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
One of the two faithful spies from 40 years earlier. He maintained his faith through all those decades of wandering. And now he steps forward. The source cites Joshua 14, verses 6-12, describing him approaching Joshua. He's 85 years old.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. Full of vigor, reminding Joshua of the specific promise God made to him through Moses to give him the very land his feet had walked on during that scouting mission.
That's right.
And Caleb's target, Hebron, the former stronghold of Arba, the greatest man among the Anakites.
He goes right for the heart of it.
His determination is just so clear. He wants to drive out the Anakim from that specific place and claim it as his inheritance.
It's an incredible picture of just tenacious faith. And Joshua, he granted Caleb's request. The source confirms that.
So he got Hebron.
He did. Joshua 14, verses 13-14 are quoted, stating, "Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly."
Oh, wholeheartedly.
Yeah. And the source indicates Caleb successfully drove them out. This isn't just a promise anymore. It's a promise claimed, secured through action rooted in decades of unwavering faith, and specifically conquering the very place that symbolized the giant's strength.
Amazing story.
So, pulling back, what's the significance of this whole Anakim narrative as the source presents it?
Yeah, what's the big takeaway?
Well, the Anakim clearly function as these powerful symbols, right?
Mm-hmm.
They represent those seemingly overwhelming obstacles, the challenges that make you feel like a grasshopper.
Right, the impossible things.
Exactly. And the story contrasts two responses to these giants.
Yeah.
You have the crippling fear and disbelief of the first generation, which led to failure and judgment, versus the faith and determination of the second generation and individuals like Caleb, which led to victory and inheritance.
Okay.
It underscores that the outcome isn't really determined by the size of the giant, but by the state of the people facing it, specifically their trust in God.
Faith makes the difference.
Faith makes the difference. But what's also fascinating, and the source touches on this, it brings in Moses' warning in Deuteronomy 9.
Oh, okay. What was that?
Moses warns the Israelites not to become arrogant or self-righteous about inheriting the land. He reminds them, look, it wasn't because you were so righteous or had such integrity. It was because of the wickedness of the nations God was driving out. And crucially, to fulfill the promise, God made way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
So it wasn't about them being good enough.
Not at all. Moses even calls Israel a stiff-necked people, which adds another layer, you see. The victory over the giants, the inheritance of the land, these were ultimately acts of God's power and God's faithfulness. Not just rewards for Israel's perfect behavior. Faith was necessary to act, but the victory and the land were God's doing.
That really deepens the picture. It's not just be brave and you'll win, but it's about faith in God's action and remembering why they were being given the land in the first place.
Precise.
So summing up this deep dive into the Anakim narrative from our source, we've kind of moved from encountering these terrifying giants and responding with fearful disbelief, which led to, significant consequences, to eventually seeing those same giants defeated through a combination of faith, determined action, and God's ongoing faithfulness.
Exactly. The story, as it's presented, ultimately reinforces that no obstacle, no giant, is insurmountable when viewed through the lens of faith and God's power. But it also balances that with the reminder that success isn't about human strength or righteousness alone. It's about God fulfilling his purposes.
Right. And it leaves us with this thought then, thinking about the giants in our own lives. those obstacles that seem massive, those things that make us feel like grasshoppers. How might looking at them through the lens of this story, focusing on faith and God's power rather than just our own limitations, how might that change our perspective? What truly stands out to you from this powerful narrative?